I have to ask myself, like, how much of what I believe is what I believe or I have processed and originally sort of fought through? And I would say not as much as I'd like.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's a pleasure to see you. We're in Provo. You live in Provo, right?
I live in Provo, and I was just reminiscing with one of your team. My startup was right in this building, and before that, across the street.
Yeah.
I love it.
Downtown
This is my
Provo,
favorite. This is my
man.
favorite part of the state.
Yeah.
Center Street, Provo. Come on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's nothing like it.
For you too. This is where.
Yeah, well, right below us, literally 2 floors down where we're standing right now. I owned a deli for 5 years.
I loved that. There was a sandwich named the Clinster.
Yeah, there was.
That was my favorite.
The Clinster.
The Clinster was my favorite sandwich.
That's awesome.
There was a lot to that sandwich. That was like a hearty.
Yeah.
That was like Thanksgiving in a sandwich.
I don't think you'd get away with that anymore because now I think you have to put calories up on the menu, and I think our calorie count would be absurd.
Yeah,
like probably over 3,000 calories in that sandwich,
which
is crazy to think. But I mean, we're talking about like sour cream, honey butter, bacon, chicken. It was nuts. Turkey. There's all sorts of crazy stuff in there.
Yeah.
So it's good to see you. A lot of people know who you are and what you work on, and you've been in this community for a long time. But you now run Album, which is a venture fund here in the state of Utah. What fund are you on now? Is it 3?
Fund 4.
4?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Time flies.
Oh, my gosh. That does fly.
Yeah.
How is it going?
Good, right? Like that's the simple statement. Great as far as, from my perspective, having moved into venture, knowing only my experiences with venture capitalists, and then stumbling into my partners, So the truth is I co-run and co-own Album. It is an equal partnership between me, Diogo Mija, and John Mayfield. And we pinch ourselves, man. Like there's little I have to complain about when I really sit back and think about it. I mean, in terms of the where we're at with Utah, where we're at with tech in the state, and then just to be saddling up with entrepreneurs, each of whom think they're building the most important thing in the world. It's a pretty amazing gig.
And before this, you were an entrepreneur and you sold a company.
Yeah.
Like, did you ever think you'd get into venture?
I never thought I would be an entrepreneur. I don't think I knew the word as a kid. Yeah, it was.
Me neither, actually.
It was not on my radar at all, let alone venture capital. I'm certain I didn't know what a VC was while I was in college, and only until we started raising money did I learn these terms of angels and VCs and then private equity and the whole bit. I think it was even like through a few startups when I finally was talking to my wife, and I was like, I guess I'm an entrepreneur. Like, the plan was always to go to medical school. The plan with my first startups was to save enough money to pay for medical school. And, it kind of got there. And then I thought, let's just keep going and see how much how much run I can get out of it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember the first time I must have been like mid-20s. This is probably a weird thing to admit on air, but maybe even late 20s when I first heard about venture capital. And it was like, they give you money, they take ownership in the company. So and I'm like, so what's the interest rate? How do you you got to pay it back eventually, right? Like it blew my mind actually that they'll just take equity in the company.
Yeah.
It was like this incredible thing.
Yeah.
Actually, it was probably like life changing. Actually, thinking about like that as a model. I've never raised venture capital, but thinking about it as like a model is super fascinating.
Yeah. In fact, early when I was getting into this, a buddy of mine, I was running my startup in China, and he recommended this video called Something Ventured. And it's a great history of venture capital, starting with Arthur Rock, and a lot of little tidbits from that informed how eventually I think we as Album sort of think about what we do, because it, for the people then, and what they were building in Silicon Valley before it was Silicon Valley, banks were like, what? No, this is how we work. This is how you return capital to us. And so then these people thought, let's take a different approach. Let's take equity. Turns out it was a good bet.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
It's a pretty good business to be in. Depending, I mean, sometimes I bet it's an incredibly difficult business to be in for some funds. But you guys have done extremely well. I wonder, like, how you feel about the history of venture capital in the state of Utah, because when I think about it, it's not a major part of the story until about, what would you say, like 2012, 2013? Not to dismiss anything that happened before then or funds that were started before then, like Kickstart, which is like an OG, like the original kind of like seed fund. And then there was what's the one where they all were part of it?
V-Spring?
V-Spring, yeah. With like all those like legends who now have like their own like various things. So all those guys did incredible things. But if you think about the companies that came out of those eras, none of them had Utah investors.
That's right. Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
It is. Yeah, it is this phenomenon of the last, we sort of were this second wave. You're right. Gavin and what they were doing at Kickstart, some of those, folks who were involved with V-Spring spun off Mercado, Signal Peak now.
Even Gavin was at V-Spring.
He was, that's right.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
Jaron Paul, a lot. When you look at those associates, it's a lot of people who've gone on to build in tech and investing pretty incredibly.
So what do you make of, like, now it seems like if you're a Utah company, you're likely to have a Utah venture fund on your cap table.
That's right.
That is a very new thing.
Yeah.
That's like a decade old at the most.
Yeah. So, kind of how did we get here? Is that the question? Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think we've always been landlocked, right? Like Utah, we sit where we sit. That's never changed. But the things that have changed are like the flow of information, So when we were raising money, me, Brad Hagan, and Mick Hagan for our startup Zinch in 2006, like we knew what was in our backyard. We knew that BYU, where we were going to school, had people who invested, and were angel investors. We knew that V-Spring existed, and we pitched V-Spring, and it was super intimidating. I still remember it. And you had to really make a journey, like a real trip to kind of get to the Bay and raise from there. And in the early goings, in the seed stage, it's typically local capital. Angel list didn't exist. There weren't these sources. With time, information flows more efficiently. I mean, now we can read anything going on anywhere to some extent. This is all pre-Twitter, all of that. And so I think with the flow of information, you started to see that, one, there were a lot of ways to do venture capital. So I would say Album is just one of many sort of ideologies on how to best do this. And we all probably think we're doing it, of course, the best way because that's what we know. But with time, we've seen a greater spectrum of the types of venture capital or just sources of capital, from people who just came off a wonderful exit, from Divvy or whatever, the most recent exit was Qualtrics, and they're personally investing, to venture funds forming. And I think with time, it's just created this proliferation where now we have many sources of capital, which has created more competition amongst us. We're all friendly, we know each other, but everybody wants to find the next big outcome. Yeah. And I think all those things just work well for entrepreneurs. You have information, more sources of capital, and those sources of capital are competing for you as a founder. So it's great. I'll sometimes wonder, like, what could we have done had we existed now? It's a tricky game to play. Yeah. You can't be too confident because you know how hard it is. There's a lot of luck, but you just wonder. It's just a different time.
Yeah, it's super different, and it's even different than it was a year ago, the whole funding environment, I'm sure, which we'll get to. But what do you think of these, like, there's a number of syndicate funds opening up. That's a new thing. Yeah. That could be like a past 2 to 3 years thing. Yeah. A couple of buddies of mine who well, the Gundersons are doing some version of that, and I think Convoy's some version of that maybe. Yeah. And a few others. But what do you make of that? That's an interesting stage to play. Yeah.
I think it's all great. Putting aside, the flavor, the syndicate approach to it, that anytime a new fund comes to the scene, like if you look at Trent Mono, a friend of ours with Convoy, like the Gundersons, another great example, they're just hustling. They're out hustling. And they'd probably tell you, like, we don't know what will perfectly work for us, but we need to try probably 2 to 3 times the number of things that maybe we're doing years from now. That was how it was for us when we started this. Is you don't know what your shtick will be. You don't know what will really work and resonate with entrepreneurs, and so you do a lot. And it creates just these little pools of activity with entrepreneurs, whether it's retreats, different forms of collaboration, bringing in experts. Like there's just so much happening right now. I think if you want it as an entrepreneur or a prospective entrepreneur, there's no shortage of places you can go to talk and just share ideas with people. And so it's all good. The syndicate approach, I think, has its real advantages. With time, there may be a need to find a devoted source of capital, but who knows? Like I think AngelList turned a lot on its head in terms of how people invest. I was just with a couple entrepreneurs. One of them said he's made 3,000 investments. I don't know how that happens, but some of them are as small as like $1,500.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
But that's just amazing, and that's not limited to Utah. But that didn't exist. I remember making my first angel investment, and it was unsophisticated. I don't think I still haven't received a dime, and it was like 15 years ago. There was no flow of information. It was just somebody who kind of knocked on the door. We're building a medical device company, and it sounded smart to me. I was like, sure, we'll put in some money.
AngelList has kind of changed the game, at least in the early stages of things. And a lot of funds are managing their whole fund out of it, aren't they?
That's right. Yeah, you have groups who do. It is. It's a smooth platform. It's taken some of, I think, the kryptonite in our industry is FOMO. Like all of us, like we'll all tell you our stories of the deal that we got FOMOed into, and we let passion and emotion and something irrational drive a decision. Among other things, I think AngelList, when you have something kind of static, on a screen, you can give a different level. Maybe you're looking at the sources, who referred it, certainly looking at some level of data. I think we've learned over the past few years, like really doing diligence on a deal becomes more important when we see the big blunders of a SoftBank or other Tiger who went like light diligence, huge check, no board seat, and things started to crumble now. I mean, we couldn't have foreseen exactly what's happened in the last few years, but AngelList was just, it took a lot of that friction out. And I think it took some of just the emotion of investing, because good entrepreneurs also know how to get you riled up for whatever mission they're building toward.
AngelList is genius. A genius idea by Naval and the team. I wonder also, like, as you think about the growth of this community and the various like stages we've been through, right? Like I would say like 2010 to 2014, 15 is very SaaS. It was software as a service community. It's still a huge contingency of SaaS companies for sure in the state, but we've gone consumer. There's been Web3 there, and now it's like AI. Like all of this is like pretty fascinating and kind of like the cycles it goes through. How do you not get too ingrained or too excited about a single technology like AI right now? Or a better example is like, how did you handle Web3 when everybody said like this is the new how we're going to do everything in the internet?
Yeah, every fund is different. We talk about it like this. We like to take executional risk. We don't like to take technical risk. So we were late to the game with Web3. We'll probably be late to the game with AI. But we view that as we're choosing where we take our risk. I think you go into this and you realize there's plenty of places things can go awry. You kind of want to limit those and say, if we're going to lose our money here or have a mediocre outcome, this is where it's going to be. All things equal, we prefer to check the other boxes. And for us, that's how we look at it. So if you look at Web3, we invested in one kind of NFT marketplace, really just enthralled with the entrepreneurs. Other than that, it was really just TaxBit. And TaxBit was less of a Web3 play. It was more of kind of the rails. You've got to pay taxes if this is going to be legitimate. And even to this day, like we're waiting for regulation. And knock on wood, we're hopeful. But the same could be said for consumer. There are those, we've seen beautiful stories, from Cotopaxi, to Freshly Picked and others. We don't have the expertise internally where that's just been a place we've decidedly said we're not the best investors there. We're not going to be the best investors. Probably others who just know it, have operated in it. And so you find with time, you start to say like, this is where we take our risk. These are the sectors we're really interested in. You have something like AI and it just permeates everything. I mean, AI will affect how we navigate as consumers. It will affect how businesses run their operations. So AI is one that can kind of proliferate all. And in a sense, Web3 or the promise of Web3 was similar. But still
AI feels a little bit more real than Web. I never really understood Web3. I remember like I watched a podcast with Mark Andreessen, who's incredible. He's a legend, right? He founded Netscape, one of the founders of Andreessen Horowitz, a huge, incredible fund out of Silicon Valley. But it was like somebody like who wasn't into tech was interviewing him or didn't know much about it, and they're like, "So how does Web3 different?" And Mark was like, "Well, you own it." And they were like, "So I don't own it now? I don't own this domain?" And like it was really interesting because he couldn't really get over the hump of like what he meant by own it. To like a layman who's just sitting there like, I already do own it. You get paid for it. Well, I already have a Stripe integration. And like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. Whereas AI, it's pretty easy to see
where the value comes. And there were real people, there were real attorneys searching out in the process of discovery, such and such. And now you have a machine that can scour libraries of information or precedent in law. Yeah, it is easier to grok, and I know there are certainly technologies and investments made based on, again, highly technical aspects to it all and just a foundation. But maybe it's because we're kind of simple in how we invest, but we like to just understand the problem. And even to this day, I think when an entrepreneur pitches, the simplest advice I could give is make sure in that first bit that you're just kind of eye to eye with who you're talking to, and they understand. They could almost repeat to you, okay, so you do this. Sometimes you get winding up, and I used to do it, and you just get so excited you talk about 10 other things without addressing the simple problem solution.
Yeah, and by the way, apologies to Mark Andreessen. He knows Web3 really well, but like, I'm sure he's going to do fantastic with that fund. So I don't want to like dismiss like his thing, but it was really interesting to see that interview with somebody who didn't even know. And him trying to explain like how Web3 now you actually own everything. And whereas AI it's complete. Are you seeing a lot? Like I made a joke probably 3 months ago at a Silicon Slopes event. Somebody asked us, we were doing like one of those fireside conversations that you've done. And then it got to like the Q&A portion. I think it was Ryan Westwood actually who we were interviewing. And they asked like, hey, how do I raise money? How do I approach venture capitalists? And I was like, just say you're an AI startup and you get every meeting. Does it feeling like that right now? Like where everybody's just throwing AI to things that are like probably not exactly AI in the way that like maybe OpenAI or these other folks might think about it?
I think it used to be that, machine learning and AI, that was, you always heard that, and then you would kind of double click by asking a question or two just to get a sense of, where the founder was coming from. Now, it's the proof's in the pudding. Like, is it an API where you're tapping into these existing AIs, whether it's, Bard, ChatGPT, OpenAI, or do you have something novel? Like, and there's the underlying question from our end, which is this something that's going to be commoditized and AI will ultimately, hurt you and as you build all this software that Google will give away for free, or are you building something novel, or do you have access to large libraries of data, whether that's owned by an enterprise, whether that's owned by a community that you're tapping into so that the learning model for that AI can do something. So I would say overall, it's easier to sniff out where there might be value than it was in the past, and it's a little less pure buzzwordy. It's certainly, if you were to say what percentage of companies are talking about AI, I mean, 80+%. You
have to be.
You have to be.
Yeah,
you have to be. I mean, every board right now that I'm on, we have to say, as a board, like, where could we avail ourselves of AI and reduce costs, increase efficiency, decrease, times to production, or whatever it is that we're solving for.
Have you ever had a company come in and you're like, hey, that's a Zapier integration? Where, like there are some where like maybe a little unsophisticated, obviously don't say who it was, but I've had, and I'm not even an investor, right? But they come to Silicon Slopes like, hey, how do we do this? Let's tell you this idea so that maybe they can get to you guys or something like that. And I was like, I think like Zapier solved that problem.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, there are that, the truth is with the size and frequency of YC cohorts and every other accelerator and every other university where innovation is happening, like, it's hard to stay on top of everything. I mean, we'll still to this day, right? We look at it, hear a new pitch, and one of the first things we do is we're just, of course, looking at the competitive landscape. And sometimes there's little to nothing. Sometimes there are 10 other companies that seem to be solving the same thing, and you kind of scratch your head, like, are they aware of this? Why didn't they surface this earlier? So it is the barriers to create a startup are as low as they've ever been in terms of just your ability to start and build something with the existing stacks that exist and all of the kind of credits, grant money, and other things that entrepreneurs have access to. And so it has, like, you will definitely see companies where you're just thinking there is something about closing yourself in a room and just using your brain and innovating and thinking fresh. And then there's the time to, of course, come out, look at what's out there and see, man, are we totally barking up the wrong tree because 10 other companies are solving this right now and have more funding?
Yeah, an interesting question for you. You started your company in 2002?
2006, last company.
2006.
Yeah.
What if AWS existed then? Does that change your world? Like things like that simple, that like it used to cost so much to even get like servers, and there was no such thing as cloud servers and all this type of stuff, right?
Computing power. I mean, I can remember thinking through a fairly finite, by today's terms, search, where one of our university customers would be searching our database of 100,000 plus, not a crazy number of students, based on multiple criteria, demographic and psychographic. And there was like the kind of the clock, to process information. So I think from a pure processing perspective, absolutely. AI certainly, like what it could do now, and your ability to intelligently take data and based on prompts, sort of drive to conclusions or suggestions for how you want to work with that data. It would be a game changer for sure.
Have you thought about any of the negative side effects of AI? I know like Elon and all these other prominent folks are like, hey, this could like destroy the world. What I've never like really heard is how.
Yeah. I think about it more on there's kind of just the personal level. Like I'm 43, like classic midlife crisis-y type things. First kid leaving the home. I bought my fancy car for me, like just all this stuff that's like.
Bought the convertible?
A 66 Impala. 66 Impala.
Very cool.
So I'm kind of an LA kid at heart, and like that lowrider Impala, that's my jam. I'm not a Tesla guy. Yeah. Well, we got to cruise in it, man. Corvette engine, like this thing purrs. But anyway, I think what I'm finding just with information writ large is like my ability or commitment to turning off the podcast for a minute and like processing something and writing something. I was just with another VC in the state, Matt Marsh, and he was saying this as we were talking, like I was sort of like, what for you is the most grounding today? And he's like, my journaling. I journal almost every day. And I go, wow. And so because of that, I've started kind of writing more. And this that's some of your, your early and just something that skill you've always been blessed with is you can write. I mean, that was, aside from eating the sandwich that was so delicious that bore your name, it was reading what Beehive was talking about and just saying like, it's just like fresh and simple and like everyman vibes. It's like Paul Rudd, but insightful. It was great. Right.
That's hilarious.
No, like
that's a cool example.
So
that's a huge compliment.
Hey, I love Paul Rudd. Who doesn't like Paul Rudd?
He's the most likable guy in the world.
He totally is. From Clueless to present day. So AI is now another movement toward good, really good. I mean, when you compare it to what Google's going to give you, you're sort of like, this is scary what it can give you. And yet, I think at a more simplistic level, not to mention like taking over, and AI that are put to carry out nefarious, whatever, is just robbing us of that space that we create to think through something and to really absorb something. It's a little simple. It's like what I talk to my kids about, but I still struggle with it, is just being fed all day. We can be fed all day. And I have to ask myself, like, how much of what I believe is what I believe or I have processed and originally sort of fought through? And I would say not as much as I'd like.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting challenge in this day and age, obviously, right? Like, you can get so distracted. I mean, Zuck just launched Threads yesterday. So now there's another one of those things, right, that we're all going to be scrolling on hours and hours on end. And it seems like, we've been doing this probably about the same time in terms of like the community type stuff.
Yeah.
And it seems like mental health has gotten worse since we started. Do you feel that? Like in 2010, absolutely. 2011, I don't remember anybody like really talking about mental health as like a thing.
It was probably more taboo.
Yeah.
Then.
But now it's like, it's affecting everyone that I know. And literally everyone I know. I don't know anyone who's not affected by it. How do we solve that as a community? How do you solve that, particularly entrepreneurship, which probably already has that anyways, because it's so lonely and nobody cares what you're doing for so long. And, you know, like not even your spouse and family really care where you're going to work. Just make sure that money comes with it, right? I don't know how we solve that. That's what makes me most nervous about AI, which is kind of along the lines of what you're saying, is like, man, the mental health aspect of this could be kind of scary.
Yeah, there are. You know, if you work from it, like all of these things can be good, but you work from home, you know, you're working and interacting with machines, you're having potentially many shallow relationships, some of whom hopefully, but like in all of it, some of just that personal connection is certainly at risk, and you have to take control. I mean, I'm on my longest social media fast ever. I'm like 60, 70 days in.
Oh, well done. How you feel?
I feel good. It's funny. At first I was like, what am I missing? And then I thought, you know, it just gets more simple. I find myself saying like moderately more time for the people I love, the people I want to spend time with, a little less of sort of, I think in Utah, subconscious or real, you can feel like there are always eyes, and you start to care about those eyes. And when you really peel it back, you're like, who the hell are the eyes? I don't even know if they're there. I just think that. Yeah. And so I would say it's been great. It's also made me think, if I do go back on, like, what might that look like? I'd probably pare it down and just say, simplify.
Isn't it interesting that we know being on social media is bad for us, but we still do it?
Yeah.
It must be like cigarettes in the 60s.
Yeah. Sugar in Utah, you know?
We don't even care. How do you manage it? How do you manage your own personal mental health? I mean, you're obviously in shape, and you're thinking about these things. You're even fasting, social media, all these types of things. How do you do this?
Yeah, it's there's many prongs to it. So, you know, when I was starting my last startup, I mean, right here, I was in that building across the street when I get a call from my mother. My brother was missing. When we found him, you know, a day and a half later, he had taken his life. And so mental health, like in our family, that was like a massive wake up call of like, okay, this was the most jarring thing you can imagine. And it's been, you know, 16 years. And I think in that time, you know, that was, so on a personal level, that was like the catalyst to like, okay, there is something deep to be understood here, you know, in addition to just kind of the grieving.
I can't even imagine.
Oh, it was, it was horrific. I think, you know, it's given me an appreciation for life for any duration at this point. And then for myself, so I was the last of kind of my siblings to seek help in terms of medication. So, I mean, there are just medical professionals in some cases where when when I was tracking, like, okay, it's 3 days and I'm still like cloud over my head. I had never had, you know, suicidal ideation at all, but I felt like, okay, I don't know if this is like normal. This isn't like the funk I can just exercise away or work away. And I got good at coping, or sort of powering through it, but I knew I kind of wanted to just feel more happiness and light. So I think there's certainly that on one end. And then I think back to what we talked about, like, you know, when my business partners, my wife, certain people, they just like immediately know from a text, from seeing me, they're like, how are you? Okay, what's up? I'm like, what? Do I have a sign on me? You know? So I think having people invested in you and who know you enough and who care can kind of call out. And sometimes just that hug, you know, Diogo, he's a hugger. That guy will see me, he'll know I'm down, he'll just grab me and bear hug me. And that's something real. Like that shoots something through my body, you know, little serotonin that's needed. And then I think there's just, you know, the tools we all find from diet, health, you know, health, having something. For me, I'm like getting too old to play regular basketball, but I still like to shoot the ball. You like to shoot hoop. Yeah. There's something about just being around a hoop, shooting it, that's like cathartic. So I put up a little hoop in my office, and sometimes I'll just take a few. You know?
That's cool. My sons have gotten really into basketball, and I love I actually just love rebounding it, passing back to them.
Yeah.
Like, this is fun.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is. It's like so simple.
It
probably.
is.
But the mental health of that, of just like bouncing a ball, it's kind of crazy.
Pickleball's it's an easy one. It's going crazy here and everywhere else. I was playing this morning there were 8 of us, you know, like 5 entrepreneurs and one of my partners, and, you know, so.
Yeah, pickleball's great.
Yeah.
how do you spend your day? What is your day? What's a typical day in Sid Krommenhoek's life?
Yeah. So, exercise every morning. So one of my best friends, a guy named Trent, works at Podium, incidentally, an investment of ours, but we exercise like every single day. So we just go Provo Rec right here in Provo, and we exercise. And then, you know, I eat and drink the same thing every morning. There's steel cut oats and a cup of coffee. And, you know, and then I'm in the office. And I think, you know, I try to keep my morning with some flexibility so that I can do a little catch up and kind of say, okay, what are the most important rocks? In my world, it's really singular. It's founders. You know, I have so many boards I sit on. And so it's going through and saying, okay, you know, is there anything I owe any of these, from, you know, adding somebody to the hiring pipeline, to checking in with them before a board meeting, to checking in on one of my founders who is taking care of, you know, her physical health and her ability to have a family down the road should she decide, and you know, and stuff like that. It's personal that they've shared. So there's always a little bit of prioritization. Once those are solved for, it's listening to pitches, it's reviewing decks, and then usually in both of those collaborating with my partners. So every Monday is without fail partner meeting. You know, wherever we're at in the world, we're on Zoom or, you know, typically in person in Lehigh, and we're talking through those two things, like, you know, founders, how to help founders, I guess, and then the other one is when we're fundraising is our LPs. You know, we are capital allocators at the end of the day, and so in addition to working with our founders, it's all for the purpose of returning capital to the groups that we're fortunate to have backing us.
Where do you get most of your deal flow? Is it recommendations from founders you've already invested in? Is it inbound? How does someone pitch you is probably the main question you get asked all the time.
Yeah. This is when, you know, I will have, and any VC, let's just say in Utah, I can't speak for everywhere, will tell you, like, I get 10 inbounds with a pitch via email and 10 via LinkedIn a day. And I always wonder when it's the cold outreach, like, why didn't you just, I'm not like some, it's not too hard to find somebody who knows me, you know, why not find a warm intro? So we give the most weight to warm intros. Like it just feels a little lazy. And hey, maybe they're getting responses from other VCs. I cannot speak to that, but we prioritize the warm intro. So if our founder is like, hey, you need to talk to a friend, or we have an engineer leaving, he has to scratch this itch and he's building something, we're like, we want to talk to him tomorrow. And so a lot of it is that, like, I've yet to invest in something that just came cold that I can think of. We certainly attend where we can. We're active with the local universities, anybody with any sort of accelerator. We want to try to help out and then ultimately treat entrepreneurs in a way that hopefully somebody wants to pitch album when they're considering all the venture firms, say in the state or elsewhere. You
mentioned you're on a lot of boards. I wonder, like, how do you do that? How do you manage all the board meetings? I imagine
it's an important one, especially for us. So we don't have junior staff at Album. There are 6 people at Album. The 3 of us who are partners, front office, finance, and events. That's it. So so what that means is I don't have staff who are going to kind of join the board meeting with me. Hey, take all the notes, prep me, read the deck, let me know what I need. Like, that is me. That is John. That is Diogo. What that means is what we do does not scale. So the strange little irony is we love to back things that we hope can scale to the moon. We don't scale. You know, our fund, we hard capped at $100 million because we couldn't responsibly look our LPs in the eyes and say we could manage $1 more. Like, that was just what penciled for us. We do 20 deals per fund. It is a very finite, straightforward thing for us. What that means in terms of boards is there is, I think, for a seed stage investor where you're working with anything from an idea and 1 to 3 people to maybe a team of 10. Like, it is small, and you're helping them with early hires, you know, thinking through go to market, all the formative stuff. I think if you have any more than 10 boards, you know, you're stretched.
A little unruly. Yeah, sounds like that'd be really hard.
So for me, I mean, it's probably closer to 8, if I'm being honest. Some of my boards, like 3 of my last 4 investments, were out of state. They were in New York City, incidentally. And so that's a little bit of travel too. I try to stack those board meetings. But in addition to taking on new boards, we cycle off proactively. So I'll meet with an entrepreneur and say, after we do a deal, I'll be like, hey, look, I'm your Huckleberry for the next 24 months. You're going to find that at about that 24-month mark, I become less important to you. And now I'm still here for you. I think we're going to develop in that time a deep friendship, I hope. But I just don't know that. I can't look you in the eyes and tell you I know what it's like to personally have operated and built anything past like 10 million in revenue, you know, in ARR. So that 0 to 1, 1 to 10 is where we like, love, and where we're useful. So at that point, when you say raise the next round of funding, consider just taking my board seat and handing it off to the next investor. Like, I don't need to sit here forever. I think it's just one of these things we do, kind of like the way we think about our kids with education. It's like, it's efficient, it's simple to just say every year you progress. The truth is, can you say each of your kids progresses at the same rate?
Yeah, no way.
No. So I think in that case, that's a lot harder. You're solving for kids everywhere. In the case of boards and venture-backed companies, it is for us, I mean, 20 deals per fund, that's, 7 deals per year. It's very finite. So we can kind of say like, let's just do it in a way that actually makes sense for the founder, for us. And so we cycle off pretty aggressively.
I think that's smart, right? Like, I mean, a lot of people stay on board so they can protect the investment, they say. It's kind of like the word, like, I want to make sure that everything's being run. But what can you really do from a board anyways at that point?
Yeah, and you hope, and you find ultimately your clout with the entrepreneur. There is a true fiduciary aspect, of course, of being on the board. But ultimately, and especially in the cases where it's going well, like, it's the trust of the founder. You know, if you get some allocation in that round, some pre-IPO or something round, like, it's probably because the founder's like, I want to carve you in. Like, the founders ultimately are driving a lot of those decisions. The boards are ratifying, certainly, and they're making the really, really hard decisions if things go haywire. But yeah, we've found that 24 months, we call it our sprint board. That's where we're just there to say we need to give outsized attention to these founders to help them get to their next round of funding, to help them hire the team needed to get there, and to, in all of that, build with them a trust that we hope is pretty firm, won't break, and will continue and persist even when we're off the board. So like Podium, one of my early investments, haven't been on that board for a while. Dennis, Eric, and I still get together. We still have, I would say, a strong level of trust. I think they would. I'm weighing in on far less these days, but occasionally they may ask an opinion on something, and that's how I would hope boards can go for us. Is we can just they can stand the test of the relationship, can stand the test of time, even if the board has a very finite duration.
It must be cool. Like, so you're getting 20 pitches a day. If you're getting 10 email, 10 LinkedIn every day, but you only have to invest in 7 a year. There must be some like freedom that comes with that, and also like some anxiety that comes with that. It's
yes.
Like, who's going to be that 7, right? How do you decide? That actually is kind of fascinating. When you put it like that, where like, we're only doing 7. There's like, all right,
2 to 3 per partner per year. I was joking with 2 friends today. They're both doing a startup. I go, if I invest in both your startups, I'm done for the year, guys. Like, let's go. Of course, facetiously, but yeah, it's, there are some things that, like, I could talk to you about some things. I don't know exactly what, but there are some topics, like I just shared one with you. If we talk about suicide survivors, like, I'm going to feel something in my belly. So move away from just the pure personal things that have touched our lives to like topics in this world that you're like, that has to be fixed. So I had a founder in New York, and I was not active out there investing or anything, but he was introduced. Comes from the second lowest like caste in his region of India. Total American dream story. University of Florida, Carnegie Mellon, Lehman Brothers, sells his first startup, which is a math app. And he's pitching me on this idea of like a pathway to the middle class. And he's saying like, we essentially, what I heard at least was the American dream for some has been diminished. So whether you're a black person in an urban setting or a white person in a rural setting, you're kind of more similar than not, I think. Like, think about it. If you're waving, like either case, somebody may be whatever. In either situation, you're saying, I don't know if the American dream is as viable for me. So whether that's Trump or Biden, I have to assume they believe that person is representing their best interests. Right. And so when I heard this pitch, I felt like something truly addressing the path to the middle class. Like, that is it. Think of our stories. I know you enough to know. And my dad came here on a boat after World War II. My mom's family's from Mexico. And like, it's the American dream. And so that was an example of, and of course it was a technology and it's doing incidentally very, very well, but it was something that I felt like in my bones, and maybe certainly more importantly, I could see the founder felt it in his bones. He was like, I mean, just bought his parents a home recently. I mean, it's like,
that's incredible.
You can't script this stuff. And so sometimes you have that come in the door, and it takes on a lot of forms. It doesn't have to be an immigrant who came from nothing. It could be somebody who grew up in the suburbs and had means and still fought. You think of Blake Murray. Like Blake Murray came from means, and yet few people are as passionate and gritty, tenacious, and appropriately ruthless as Blake. So it comes in different forms and genders and shapes and colors, but it feels the same. And I've seen it, and we've seen it enough that you at least have a whiff of it sometimes where we'll kind of look at each other's partners and we're like, gosh, that's like special. So it's hard to perfectly quantify it or describe it. That's how I would describe it.
Did you grow up in Utah?
I was born in LA. That was the melting pot for my parents where they met. They're both converts to the LDS faith.
So you're a Lakers fan and Dodgers fan?
I am.
I'm a huge Dodgers fan. I can't be
I grew up with, I was like Fernando Valenzuela, Pedro Guerrero. I would hear about Steve Garvey and some of the old ones. And
Kobe. I was a huge Kobe fan.
To this day.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
I will root for Utah Jazz all day long. There's always something nostalgic about the Lakers. My son just painted a mural at on this old shed we have, and it was like, he's like, give me an idea. I'm like, Kobe. Especially when I heard this 824, they're going to reintroduce the Mama brand, and everything. It's so cool. But yeah, in the 80s, I was actually just having this conversation. So we're in Whittier, California, and it's a harsh word, but I mean, my sisters were facing major persecution by our own people, like of the same, race, for being Mormon. And it's strange to think of that in this day and age, but it was so bad, like where mean things were this is before cell phones, like endless prank calls saying mean things, a bag of potatoes left on our door saying, here, you guys can't afford stuff that like is really, really, we just had a family reunion. So I was asking them about this because I was 4 years old. And so we thought it was a good time. My dad had a hard time keeping down a job, come to Utah. It was kind of Mecca in the 80s. So we came here in 84, and Pleasant Grove is where we landed and where I grew up, and PG High, class
of 98. What was that like? What was growing up in Pleasant Grove like for you?
It was all the simplicity of just life as kind of lower middle class kid, I mean, we played Andy I over, night games were a big deal. The kid on the street who got the Nintendo, we went over and played, and I sucked at everything on the I was never good at video games. And I think just work, I was, my dad kind of exited, stage right, struggled through a lot of things. He was born during the Dutch hunger winter. And so if you look at the record of people born in 45 and 46 in Holland, they never developed fully in the womb. And statistically, like literally my grandmother was starving when she had him. And so he struggled his whole life and tried his hardest, but couldn't really hold down a job and care for the family. So there was like just work early on. I had a paper route, saved up money to eventually get a little push scooter, not like the electric scooters, and then a bike. And that's how I did, had my little hustle. So it was just, I think just work and Americana. I mean, I can't complain. I felt like I had everything, even though there were no sugar cereals in the house. And
we had a very similar childhood in that respect. It was like, but you had to work as a kid.
Yeah.
That feels different.
And those lawnmowers didn't like self-propel. It was like a heavy lawnmower.
You had to push those things.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
What's the album origin story?
Yeah.
How did it come about, and how did you land on the name album?
Yeah. So, me and my partners, John Mayfield and Diogo, we were all at Peak Ventures, so another venture firm that had started, and that's where we sort of fell into one another, and eventually we call it a Darwinian outcome. Like we didn't know each other before. We saw that each of us that were decent at investing. I say that carefully, but it's a long game, and it takes you like 5 years to see if you're any good at this.
Yeah,
and even then you sort of wonder, like you kind of know intuitively, like I know what got me here won't help me forward. But anyway, we were all decent at investing, and we had just, maybe more importantly, something very complementary to each other. So when we decided to raise up Album, there was this old video of Dave Grohl from the Foo Fighters, August 8th, coming to Utah. I'm getting I'm going.
Cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
And they accepted a Grammy, and he said, we're most proud of this album because we recorded it with no computers in my garage. And there was something just so nostalgic about it. You know, I grew up with like albums. I mean, they were they were CDs, but it was like Dre the Chronic, Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, Nevermind, Nirvana, you know, and you listen to all the tracks, and some of the tracks, the way they were set up was they meant to roll into one another when you listen to them. And so we looked at that, and I guess both hearing this musician talk about recording something and kind of in the garage, you know, sort of a comparable to starting a startup in the garage. There was a little bit of that. And then there was this idea of an album. And these albums that we grew up on, you came to appreciate all the music. And sometimes you would certainly on some of those tracks, like have the songs that they played on the radio. But sometimes you have a track that was never played on the radio and you just love. Like for me, it's this song by Smashing Pumpkins called 33. I love it. I sing it to my kids at night. It's like a perfect bed night song. It's really good. It's just beautiful and it's just melodic and I think it's for us similar to investing in that we do 20 deals per fund. We know those founders really well. We've seen them through divorce. You know, we've seen them through massive mental illness, to have to, you know, recover in a hospital setting, babies born, lives almost lost, a life lost in an early kind of team member. So you come to appreciate the art of each one of those companies. Some go to the moon and everybody knows. And of course, they're the ones we probably are guilty of rattling off first when you say, what have you invested in? Yeah. But by and large, you appreciate the art of all of them. And so Album, it just felt like something less of like the top of a mountain, a large tree. It's like, come on, we're not, who knows if we'll get there. But what we do know is we have an appreciation for the art, and we think this could look cool on a skateboard or a surfboard or something. You know, it just kind of feels, we're proud to wear it. My kids love it.
Cool. Yeah, it's super cool. And I think being a VC is an art. Like there is it's a very boutique profession, right? Because you can only invest in so many. You can only be on so many boards. You can only go deep on. You must spend a lot of time like reading and thinking about what's the next trends. What are what should we be focused on? What are we missing? That type of stuff.
Yeah, I think I was commenting today. I was talking with this entrepreneur, and you know, it's interesting how the more I watch sci-fi, the more you watch like old. I mean, you watch whether it's Star Wars or Star Trek or whatever, you realize like those were they're the ones telling the future. Yeah. You know, we laugh about it, you know, these different concepts, but then with time, like it seems to be. So I think we find ourselves, we love to just go down these rabbit holes. One of my partners loves stoicism. So he's always pulling out like stoicism is something to sort of slow down the mind, you know, concentrate, you know, focus, like really sort of analyze thoughts and emotion. And then there's just geeking out on something. Like we do an offsite every quarter together, and whether it's the movie we decide to watch or just something to discuss, it's fun to go deep. And usually it's introduced to us by an entrepreneur. Like you're having somebody pitch you something. Like I remember when AI Dungeon, Latitude is the company here, and you know, these brilliant brothers out of BYU, and they're talking about kind of a modern day equivalent of the Choose Your Own Adventure books, if you ever read those as a kid, where it was do you want to do this or do you want to do that? And they were using AI to do it. And this was really, they were very early in the use of AI in GPT-3 and now 4. And, you know, the way you go in these guys' house, and I remember it was like Legos and video games, and they're like grown men. It was just awesome. But they're the types, like these sci-fi geeks, you know, who are just thinking differently and doing things that then were availed by all the wave of where we've seen AI go, not just from text, but to image and video. So you cannot, I was with Kat Kennedy this morning, having a cup of coffee, and she was commenting like, I was like, how is it? She's a year in. Yeah. And she's like, it's just like the most fascinating job. Like the rate of learning is just amazing. Yeah. You know, and you see it too. Like you're seeing companies as frequently as I am, and you're like, there's just no shortage. And if you think you're at the end of it or somewhere in the middle, we're probably wrong. Like this will just persist for a long time. I think we're in the early innings in Utah, not to mention just
I wanted to ask you
go.
about Utah and kind of the future is what you see, because when we were screwing around in like 2010, I would have never imagined 2023 Utah would look like this. What does Utah look like in 2033? That's not that far away.
Yeah,
but I can't even imagine.
Yeah, I mean, the Wasatch Front will continue to evolve before our eyes. We're both Utah County or South Utah County. I'm, mid whatever Utah County, and we're just seeing this boom. We saw all of these entrants to our state, people from the coast coming in, thinking they were going to take a quick pit stop and vacation and weather kind of the COVID storm, and then they stuck around.
Yeah.
Met with one the other day, and so impressive what they're building. And so I think we'll just continue to see. I mean, it may go down that like the Utah Jazz tell a really important story for Utah. Like I think the Utah Jazz and Ryan in leading it will shape culture in the state. I think he's fundamentally saying like, I want to have a contending team. And and you could say audacious, but then you're like, who has he brought in? How's he going about it? They're playing a long game. I think it will have like beautiful, I don't know if ramifications aren't the word that sounds negative, but a beautiful impact and influence on state and church and these things that we continue to watch progress, adapt in I think beautiful, ways. And I think the same will be said for tech. I mean, we have certainly the champions who have been fighting an uphill battle in the Sid Tetros, and other people championing causes. We have this rising university in our backyard of UVU, which we don't talk about like we talk about our pride as Utes, where I played a little ball. BYU went to school there too, and yet you have UVU that is serving the most diverse group of students in the state. A third of them are first-gen students. I look at that and I just go, I think we're going to see some little hallmarks of our state. I think one will be like the first tech. There's probably already been one or two. The next tech unicorn to come out of UVU. I think we're just going to see pockets of innovation and people innovating that in the past we just haven't. And I'm not going to say why or pretend like I'm an expert. I grew up here like you. I'm sure we have our thoughts, but I get really excited when I look forward to say we will see a broader breadth of who's building and how they're building. We've also seen a very, like if you were to, list the attributes and the stage presence of the CEOs that we've seen building in tech, they're similar in some ways. And I think beautifully similar, but you know them better than anybody. I think you're going to see that profile grow. You'll still have, and you'll be glad to have the type A, loves the stage, rah, power through. But I think you'll also see the more quiet, product leader and whatever it is, like even in just men and women, like, I was in a board meeting recently, and the way that these co-founders, they're Italian sisters, they're based in Brooklyn, the way they were navigating something was just so different, and I couldn't put my finger on it. The only thing I could come to in talking to my partners is I think the way that women lead is just by and large different. And I'm not even going to say better, certainly not worse. And it was refreshing. It was like there are so many ways to win.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's super interesting what you said about the Jazz. I think about that a lot. I've always thought the Utah Jazz are like the front door to Utah. Like if you go somewhere and you say, I'm from Utah, you're going to get one of two things.
I'm in China, and that's what they say. They know the Utah Jazz.
You're going to get Jazz or the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints. It's like one of those two things. But most often it's the Jazz.
It is.
100% the Jazz.
Yep.
Good. Let's talk about Karl Malone, John Stockton, the shot over Barkley. I mean, there really is something fascinating there. And it does seem like Ryan is leading that with the future in mind, and not just the future of that franchise, but the future of the state. Like he has got I was actually talking to somebody close to him recently about this. I was like, man, the weight on his shoulders, like every decision is like under a microscope. It's almost like he's like an unelected governor or something. Like if you run a team like that and you run an organization like that, right, with an eye towards like we're building a state. We're building like the innovation capital of the world. We're changing this brand.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of pressure.
And what's more telling, like all the data, all the survey data, public sentiment, this and that, what's more telling than your ability as that type of a franchise to recruit and know will succeed and enjoy it here, a man of color? Mm-hmm. That is like an amazing bellwether for this. And and you can't refute it. Like, you kind of have to look that in the eye. And I think I would guess he's like, no, this will be a wonderful place to be. It is for so many. It's going to be for so many more. And we can't quite say that. I mean, we can't.
Donovan made that clear.
Yeah, right? Yeah. And it's not like it's a slap to the face. I just take it as like, it is what it is, and let's chip away. Let's chop wood.
I love his like kind of pioneer attitude too, which I think we all have inherently if we live in the state of Utah. There's something really special about pioneers, right? And we have that in our blood, which is one of the reasons why I think we're so entrepreneurial and we punch above our weight class in this state from an entrepreneur perspective. Because there's only 3 million of us in the whole state.
Yeah.
And the fact that we're doing any of this is kind of wild, right?
Yeah.
Like, but I love like he'll always say like, you can't change New York. Go try to build New York.
Yeah.
Already built.
Yeah.
Utah, not built.
Let's
go.
That's
and there's something kind of beautiful about that, huh?
There is.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. Like, it's like the beautiful foundation, sure, laid, but like pieces of it that we haven't seen yet, for sure. We're somewhere out of our infancy, but well ahead of our teenage years as a state, right?
Yeah. What's next for you? What are you doing? Are you going to keep doing investing? You think this is like all the way until you're retired?
Yeah, it's you think about those things. Just where I'm at with, I mentioned before, my oldest is going off to college, University of Michigan, go blue, this fall. Cool. Yeah, and you start to think, and I think where I sit now is we're so proud of what we get to be a part of, and I'm so proud of the brand that I get to represent with my partners, that we've got a lot of life, ahead of us. I don't think we'll ever give up investing. Do we do it, as album proper, like for the foreseeable future? Yes. And it's hard to think much past that. Like, at this stage, I've got a lot of nephews and nieces. They're concentrated here in Utah. Mm-hmm. I look forward to cheering them on as they're pursuing their thing. And I mentioned, UVU, there are a few Women Tech Council and UVU, I mentioned both. They're both important to me. I just admire the two women, Astrid and Sid, who are leading those, and the teams that they've put together. And so I think the notion of retirement one day, I don't know what that looks like. What I know is it'll take on different forms, my energy. And for now it's investing, and I'm sure, but we've started to piece in, my wife and I, like other things that are important to us and that we think are useful to see grow in the state. And we're both benefactors of, from education to mentors to, grants and programs that existed for us when we were coming up. So we feel a responsibility to continue to put back into the soil here. And yeah.
What's so special about Provo? Are you ever leaving this town?
Gosh, Provo, look, there are days where we were at a BYU basketball game. I look over at my wife and I go, what are we doing here? Like, and I think it was just because we've been here now more than a decade straight. We came back from China to here, and it was a little more crisis. We had a daughter with some major medical issues that brought us back to Primary Children's. And now it's like kids are healthy, happy. And, but I think our backyard, we're hiking in Rock Canyon. It's just breathtaking. I sit in my backyard and look at what used to be called Squaw Peak. I can't remember the new name of it. Yeah. But that mountain.
Yeah.
I have access to, now BYU's in the Big 12, so great sports. I'm going to see Kansas playing in the Marriott Center, not to mention, football. It is really hard to beat. Deer Creek, it really is, you kind of have it all. And I think the growing inclusivity, which is one of the aspects that just matters to us for personal reasons with our kids and family, is like, it's just got to be a place where the tent's got to continue to be large and even larger. And so seeing that happen, and seeing just this past month all the pride flags flying in our neighborhood, I'm sort of like, it's only getting better. So I'm going to find a little gripe anywhere I live. Yeah. I've got to, I don't know, I'm 15% pessimistic about stuff and, but yeah, I think we'll be here a long time. We will always have a place here. We will always have a place in Utah. Yeah. I'm sure with time we'll split in other areas.
Sure.
We'll always have a place here.
Hey, thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah.
Seriously, it's always great to catch up.
Thanks for having me.
And hear your insights. And for those listening, it sounds like cold LinkedIn messages are the best way to pitch you.
That's right. Keep them coming.
Thanks, everybody.